Sam.
Just so you know, there's Rabbi. Hi.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. How are we doing?
You jumped in. Yeah.
All right, everybody. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Beha'alotecha. Beha'alotecha is a long, confusing word. And it makes it even more confusing knowing in which context the word is used. Beha'alotecha, the root of that is a word that we should all be familiar with, which is the word oleh or aliyah, el-al, to raise up. Means upon. Aliyah means to raise up, to elevate, right? Beha'alotecha, therefore, would mean when you are raising up. Okay, so we could think of many different things that might be raised up, right? And this is Moshe on God's behalf talking to Aaron, right? That Moshe Hashem tasks Moshe with talking to Aaron, giving him instructions, as was very often the case, especially now, as Aaron is taking charge of his duties in the temple. Moshe is instructing him about all the various things that he is meant to do. So, one of the duties, or one of the instructions, is this opening passage of this parsha, Beha'alotecha, when you will raise up. Now, what is the continuation of that verse?
Does that mean when you will raise up, or when you are raised up?
No, when you will raise, Beha'alot, when you will cause to be raised up.
When you will be raised up.
Cause to be raised up.
When you go up the step.
Right. But so you might think of reference now. First of all, there are no steps in the temple, because even the mizbech, even the altar, had a ramp, as we talked about. As he says, "Lo talib b'malot hamizbechi," you should not go up on step. So we can, and we know it can't mean that. But on the other hand, many of the offerings have that word oleh or olah in them, right? To offer up an offering, right? And one of the in fact, the most common of the offerings was a karban olah, the offering that was called the olah, which means to go up. And the reason is because it was an offering that was entirely given up to God. It was entirely consumed by the flames of the altar. It was not divvied up between the Kohen, the one who brought it, and God, which was the Karban Shlamim, but rather this was Karban Olah was entirely consumed to God. So if I saw those words, that when God says to pass on to Aaron that when Beha'alotecha, when you will raise up, I would assume that it's got to be something like that. Maybe raise up your children to the priesthood. You know, there's a lot of different things it could mean. Or that would make sense for that verse to end with. But what it does end with, or at least what it does reference, is puzzling. Not puzzling because we're not familiar with the particular service or the particular instruction. It's not the instruction so much, but it's that use of the word Beha'alotecha. Why? Because it says, Beha'alotecha, when you'll raise up et hanerot, the lights of the menorah. When you will raise up the lights of the menorah. And what should be very confusing, what is confusing, I think, to all of us, is that we are all very familiar with the word for kindle, to light a flame. We are very familiar with. We say it every single Friday night, and we also say it every night of Hanukkah. What's lehadlik? Which should have been what. If this is Moshe talking to Aaron about kindling the lights of the menorah, and what should the word have been? Bahadlikecha or bahadlik. We really don't find anywhere else in the Torah where we are ever use the term of la'alot or laha'alot in reference to lighting flames. This is the only place. Everywhere else it says lahadlik, or some version of that. So it's a strange word. And the fact is that, as often the case, this interesting word has now become the name of the entire Torah portion, which means that not only does the Torah choose to use this interesting word, it doubles down on it and makes it the name of the Torah portion.
Is it
You should
used
know,
in
by
any
the way,
other
my
place?
phone is silent for hours, and the second I start the class, it's nonstop ringing.
Do we bring you
it's
luck
just,
or you don't like it?
it means that I've got a long line of phone calls to make as soon as the class is over.
Rabbi, is Beha'alotecha used in other places in the Torah?
Sure, not the exact word, but
La'alot, but
yeah,
but
our
Beha'alotecha?
lahalot we do use, and as I said, when you bring a karban, the karban Allah, etc., that we find that there are times that we use this, but to use it in reference to a candle is seems to be a strange use. So Rashi cites the Talmud that clarifies for us that Moshe is giving over, in a sense, the parameters of the obligation to light the candles of the menorah. Not just that he has to kindle, but it says Rashi, signing Gemara, that you are to inform Aaron that in his kindling of the menorah, of the lights of the menorah, he should know or understand that his job over there is not complete until shalhevet olah me'alah, until the flame is rising and burning on its own, a self-sustaining flame. That's what the word laha'alot is indicating, that Aaron should not just kindle and walk away from a sputtering spark that will then just extinguish itself, but he has to make sure that the flame is burning, is rising, as it were, and burning self-sufficiently. That's when he knows he has fulfilled his obligation of lighting. Okay, and so that's what the reference to the lahalot means, to rise up, that he has to stay at it. He has to stay at it until the flame is burning on its own. All right? Here's the obvious question. We all have seen those trick candles, right? Where you light them, you think they're lit, and they go out. We get that for that special occasion that people get them, for Hanukkah, right?
Oh, really?
I'm not talking about the birthday candles. I'm talking those candles that never stay lit on Hanukkah. I'm not talking about trick candles.
I thought you meant on
birthday
purpose.
Candles. Yeah, I am. I'm talking about those candles that they feel like the trick candles. You like those candles, the 44 in a box candles and blue box always that you get for Hanukkah, and they never stay lit, right? You light them, and they give you they light immediately, and you get that momentary sense of accomplishment. I did it, great, and move on to the next candle, and then it fizzles out, and you gotta. And I have a lot of practice with this, because when you give each one of your kids a menorah to light, and they each stick in six, and every single one of them
That'd be a lot of practice.
Relight. But here's the thing: it's never, ever happened where my kids have assumed that if they light it and it goes out immediately, that their job is done. Right? Every kid knows intuitively from 2 years old and onward, right?
Gotta go
that
back.
if you touch the taper to the flame and it sparks and fizzles and dies, that what?
Go back.
You got to go back and light it. That's not considered lit. So the question is, was God and Moshe really concerned that Aaron would kind of go, touch it, spark, and say, all right, I'm done, and just walk away? Like, obviously, he's going to understand if the flame is not burning. What? Jerry's jumping ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're on it. But that if the flame is not self-sufficient, then you don't light it. We don't, like the Torah is going out of its way to make this point that seems to be intuitive and obvious. It doesn't, for example, tell Aaron, when you're going to light it, don't light it with a stick of dynamite. Use something that is. We rely on Aaron's basic common sense. Okay, so we don't have to fill him in on every last detail. Take 2 steps forward, but don't take 3 steps forward because then you're going to bump into the menorah, right? Just make sure you only take the 2 steps forward. Like really, Aaron's not a child here. And so to make the point, Aaron, to make sure that if it sputters and dies as soon as you tie it and never became a self-sufficient flame, that you shouldn't think that you've fulfilled your obligation. You got to actually make sure it's lit. Yeah, yes, I assume so. So the answer, as Jerry was mentioning, is the fact that Aaron's job is not just to light the candelabra in the tabernacle in the Mishkan. Moshe is not just talking to him about a golden fixture that can be found in the tabernacle, but rather when we're talking about the Neirot, we're talking about the candles, as it were. We know Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. That what is the candle of God? Nishmat Adam, the soul of every person. And when God is telling Moshe to tell Aaron that when you will raise up those flames, be a source of inspiration to whoever it is that you are engaging with. As a Kohen, your job is not only to lock yourself in the temple and be all holy and consecrated unto God, as we talked about last week. That was why we're a Nazir, is nearly perfect, but has a modicum of sin, as it were, because unlike the Kohen, the Nazir removes and separates themselves from the world around them. And the Kohen transcends, but never removes, is not removed from the congregation. Transcendent is a transcendent presence among the congregation. And Aaron's holiness is understood, self-understood, because that's the way Judaism is. He doesn't even really need that instruction. Doesn't even need the instruction that he should go out and share his holiness and inspiration with others. That is a given. And that's why Moshe doesn't have to tell him to go out and light the candles. Rather, he begins, Beha'alotecha, when you are already engaged, as we know you will be, in raising up these flames. But understand, Aaron, that your job is not just to spark them. Your job is not just to give them the spark. Your job is to stay with them until they are self-sufficient flames. Stay with them, to nurture that spark until it becomes a flame. And until that flame is burning self-sufficient. Burning to the point where it can then turn around and light other flames. Because ner le'echad, ner le'me'ah. Another beautiful quote from Shlomo Melech, that a candle for one is a candle for 100. One candle is not limited in its capacity to inspire to just one other. One candle can light another candle, can light another candle, can light another candle, and those candles in turn can light other candles and other candles. And at no point does such an engagement bring about a deficiency in your own flame, which is the remarkable thing about fire. Most other resources, if I share the resource, there's less for me. And even though it might still be the right thing to do, but I have to contend with the fact that if I give of my resource, then it's going to cost me. It might, again, still be the right thing to do. It might work out in the long run, but the undeniable fact that this will cost me. When you're lighting a flame, that is not the case. Touching a candle to another candle only means more light, double the amount of light. You are multiplying the amount of light without ever one candle losing anything. And that is a truly, truly powerful principle and concept. And so, Aaron, you have to understand that it is a requirement on your part as a Kohen, and obviously the fact that the Torah is sharing this with us, and it is in the first person. The Torah is talking Beha'alotecha, not Beha'aloto. Torah is not informing us about what Aaron did. If you read the word, it says when you, the Torah is saying when you're reading this, you're the you that the Torah is talking to. Beha'alotecha, when you will not just kindle, but when you will raise up, you will nurture until it is a hashalhevet ola me'aleha. And that is a line that three words that have become part of like the classic jargon of the Jewish people. Shalhevet ola me'aleha. A flame that is rising on its own. That is your responsibility to stay with somebody, to stay with, and whoever you are, and whatever you are. It was interesting. There is the cycle of Pirkei Avot, of the ethics of our fathers, that everybody studies between Pesach and Shavuot. It's such a firm and established tradition to study it in the 6 Shabbos between Pesach and Shavuot. 6 Shabbos because it's a total of 7 weeks, but Pesach and Shabbos each kind of eat up some time. So there's a total of 6 Shabbos. Always will be 6. There will always be 6 Shabbos between Pesach and Shavuot. And what is remarkable is that it is such a perfect tradition, as it were. It is so right and correct that we should be studying the ethics of our fathers in between Pesach and Shavuot, that we don't even let something as simple as arithmetic get in our way. And what do I mean by that? Because if you open the tractate of Avot in the Mishnah, the source of it, you will find that there is in fact not 6 chapters. There's only 5 chapters. Last time I checked, 5 is not 6. 6 weeks, 5 chapters. But again, it was so right and so correct that we should be studying this, that we went ahead and created a 6th chapter just to fit this. And that's why we don't call it the Tractate of Avot when we study it. We call it Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the kind of ethics of our fathers, because it would be a lawyer, right, Jerry, would if we dared call it the Tractate of our fathers after we've, to a certain degree, changed it a bit, adulterated it, we can't abuse the trademark, right? We can't call it Tractate of Avot because it is in fact not Tractate of Avot. It is Tractate of Avot +1. So we call it Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the ethics of our fathers. But here's the thing: it is such powerful stuff. It is such powerful stuff because we have to appreciate that Pirkei Avot stands alone, or even Masechet Avot, let's say the Tractate of Avot, stands alone from all the rest of the tractates of the entire Mishnah. The Mishnah is one of the greatest, most seminal, central works of Judaism. It is the entirety of the oral Torah. For those that took the JLI call it, of course, Book Smart. We've talked about it, focused on this. This is the entirety of the what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, the great director of this initiative, the leader of the Jewish people at the time, what he undertook, and he will forever go down in history as Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, because he accomplished this. He took up until that point the oral and definitively oral tradition, the entire constellation of commentary and discussion and legalistics surrounding the written law, and he committed it to writing with collaboration from every sage of the time. He received 100% collaboration, and he came up with this incredible and eternal work called the Mishnah. We use it forever, and we will use it forever. The Mishnah is the base of the Talmud. The Talmud is the base of all halacha. Everything is in the Mishnah. Every single tractate of the Mishnah is seminal and is essential to Judaism, and yet among them all, the Masechet Avot, Tractate Avot, stands alone and apart from the rest of them. In what way? It stands apart and alone because the rest of them are the laws of what we need to do, what we are obligated to do as Jews, law-abiding citizens, and the laws span agriculture and civil and ecclesiastical, et cetera, from Shabbat, laws of Shabbat, to laws of kosher, to laws of lending and borrowing and marriage, and laws of tithing, and laws of giving the first fruits to bring it into everything. It covers all the bases. And then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi turned to all these rabbis that had helped him collaborate and said, and now we're going to take the time to put one other tractate in the Talmud, in the Mishnah. And it's not going to have a single law in it. Because as Jews, we are not just about the law. We go above and beyond the law. It's not just about justice, it's about righteousness. It's not just about making sure that we can't get punished or we give a fair shake to whoever it is. It's not just about what we are obligated to do. That is not what Judaism is to us. We are all striving to be righteous. We are all striving to be as perfect as possible in our service of God, to go above and beyond the letter of the law. And I am turning to each of you who will be living examples, are guiding lights throughout history as to what righteousness looks like. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi and Hillel and Shammai and Rabbi Gamliel, you will forever be the names that people will look up to and emulate in terms of what righteousness in Judaism looks like. I am asking you here in this last tractate, after a lifetime of righteousness, what is your motto? What is your message of righteousness to the people? We are going to immortalize, in a sense, what would be in your deathbed advice. If you know that there would be one piece of advice about how to serve God that would carry on long after you have passed, what would that be? And in one tractate, he compiled all the greatest advice in this regard, beyond the letter of the law, not what they believe this moment calls for legally, but what as a Jew, what do we live with as a Jew? What should drive? And each one of them spoke from their unique place in life, and this one being a great scholar, and this one being involved with government, and this one having been born a non-Jew and converted, and this one being a firebrand, and this one being a pragmatist, and it all together compiled this great masterwork that we call Pirkei Avot. And for this reason, Chabad, among other communities, don't just study this in the incredibly important period between Pesach and Shavuot, this period of self-refinement and self-improvement, which is what exactly Pirkei Avot is, and why it's so correct to study it, as we said, and that is why we even created a 6th chapter, so we can have it really be a full, wholesome study over the course of the weeks leading up to Shavuot. But as we move from Shavuot, between Shavuot and Rosh Hashanah, which is a time also that we're going from high point to high point, and also kind of traverses perhaps the time of the year where our morals are most challenged, the summertime, right? And people are a little bit more permissive in their morality during the summer than they otherwise are. This is the time that it would be most welcome to counterbalance that with the study of Pirkei Avot, and that is why, again, Chabad, among other communities, continue the cycle, and we go and we study every Shabbat the next chapter in Pirkei Avot, and when we get to chapter 6, we start again from the beginning, and we keep this going all the way through the summer, all the way until Rosh Hashanah. And so we just started again last week, the first Shabbat after Shavuot. And the first entry was the first Mishnah in the Tractate of Avot, makes a very fascinating point, which would seem to be not necessarily relevant to anybody but great scholars. It seems like it'd be scholars talking to scholars. Why? What do I mean? It starts off with giving us the provenance, as it were, of all the sayings that we are about to hear. You should not feel the Pirkei Avot is almost like, I'm paraphrasing for perhaps what the Pirkei Avot is, the point that the Pirkei Avot is trying to make, that these are not just when you're hearing the wisdom, you're not hearing the wisdom of the sages, You're hearing divine wisdom, because this wisdom is gleaned from a tradition that goes all the way back to Sinai. So it's not this rabbi's personal opinion as to how to live a good and fulfilled life. This is this rabbi's opinion based on a lifetime of the study of Torah that goes all the way back to Sinai. This is Misorah. Misorah is a big word in Judaism, our tradition. And that word actually comes, again, from this first entry into the Pirkei Avot, where it says, Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai. This is how the first Mishnah begins. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, i.e., directly from God. Umasara, and he gave it over. There's that word Misara, Misora. Misora does not literally mean tradition. It means what has been handed down, what has been passed on. So that he passed it, the entire Torah, to Yoshua. Oh, Yoshua was a Zakanim Lenavim. Yeshua gave it to the elders, and the elders gave it to the prophets, and the prophets safeguarded the tradition and the Torah's wisdom all the way through weathering good kings and not such good kings. Right? The prophets were there alongside King David, keeping him on the straight and narrow, and Shlomo HaMelech, and even through kings like Achav, Ahab, etc., where they were the only ones that were holding the line, as it were. Etc. And all the way through, this came into the Nevi'im, and then Nevi'im Misaruha, and then the Nevi'im passed it on at the beginning of the second commonwealth of the Jewish people, i.e. the period of the second temple, when the Jews resettled the land of Israel. And they were not able to reestablish their sovereignty, their independent sovereignty, because they were then under the rulership of Persia, and then Greece, and then Rome, etc., etc. They had it reestablished for a very brief period, the Hasmonean sovereignty, but for the most part, they were not ruled by their own Jewish king. So what was the governing body in the Commonwealth of Israel at the time of the Second Temple? What did Ezra establish? He established, go ahead.
Sanhedrin?
The Sanhedrin was the judicial body. Yes, and the Sanhedrin oversaw they were the guardians of the Torah and making sure, but in a sense, the governance, like roads, bridges, taxes, disputes, all these things, there was a decidedly, call it political and civil element that was not necessarily the role of the Sanhedrin, although the people that made up this governing body also most often sat on the Sanhedrin, but this was Ezra. Very good. Ezra, who was the great leader who brought about the Second Commonwealth, established a body called the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly. One of those words should be very familiar to us, right, in terms of a governing body. Knesset, and it's not an accident. The modern-day Knesset in Israel saw itself as a return to that legacy of a governing body in the Holy Land, and they named themselves the Knesset after that body. In fact, that's not the only parallel between the two. Anybody know how many members of the Knesset there currently are?
That's right, it was the same one.
120.
There are 120. How do they come up with the number?
120.
Yes, right. So because the original Anshe Knesset HaGedolah was a 120 member body. And so now you know. Now you want to talk about whether if there's any other parallels. One would argue that that's where the parallels have ended.
Correct, the number.
But
Right.
but either way, if you ever wanted to sound like the know-it-all at the water cooler, now you can tell why there's 120 members to the Knesset. But either way, so this is where Pirkei Avot pauses in its very quick, in a sense, walk through history, from Moshe to Yeshua to the elders to the prophets to the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. And here we stop. And we pause and we hear our first piece of advice. Heim amru shlosha dvarim. They said three things. So this is the end of the first entry. Hevu mesunim badin. One should be very deliberate in their judgment. One should be very deliberate in their judgment. And that's not, again, that seems to be a governing body or a judging body talking to probably other judges. Because why is this relevant to me? I'm not a judge. The answer is we're always a judge. That's all we do all day. Is we take in certain scenarios or certain media and certain facts and whatever it is that we see, and we are immediately making judgments of whatever it is that we are seeing or encountering, or events, people, etc. And here we're hearing some very important advice from people who've made a living out of being judges. They are saying our first piece of advice is be very deliberate in your judgment. Deliberate, we don't mean be very in this case, we don't mean deliberate as be very firm and unbudging in your judgment. We mean the other meaning of the word deliberate, which means very careful.
Deliberate.
Very cautious
careful.
and careful and patient in your judgment. Make sure it's more important to get it right than to get it right away. So be very careful and deliberate in your judgment. And then Beha'amidu talmidim harbe. And the next piece of advice is establish many disciples. And I think this goes, and this is actually the whole reason I mentioned that I brought the whole discussion on Pirkei Avot here in the first place, was to connect this back to the idea we just shared about Aaron, which is, it is your responsibility to share of your flame. It is your responsibility to not only spark, but to nurture the flame in others. Beha'amidu talmidim harbe. You have to stand up many disciples. What does this mean? Certain people, it means as simple and as straightforward as it sounds. Get into the classroom and nurture as many students as you can. And for others, it's a variation, and it could be a significant variation on this idea. Every single one of us have to share from our flame. We have that responsibility. Nobody has the right to not be sharing. And for certain people, it's, again, teaching in a classroom. For certain people, it's being in their group of friends and making a point that to be just a voice of goodness and morality and positivity and information among their groups of friends, to just steer them towards good things and right things and correct things. It could mean that if you have a particular talent, that you use it to inspire others. It could be that you reach out and work with your immediate relatives. Every single person is going to look different, but here is a responsibility that we have in Yiddishkeit. We received the Torah because we were Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad at Mount Sinai, and we say Sim Shalom Tova Bracha Brachenu Avinu. Why? Because Kulanu Ke'echad.
Kulanu ke'echad.
This is a responsibility we've taken upon ourselves, that we are not going to be islands unto ourselves. Beha'alotecha tanerot. Aaron, you are a Kohen. You are the Kohen Gadol. You are going to be going lifnai v'lifnim, into the Holy of Holies. If there is a person that can make an argument that they have to be separated and consecrated and transcendent, etc., and removed from the people, you would have a hard time finding a better candidate for that argument than the Kohen Gadol. And yet, Moshe is reminding Aaron that your role is not only to inspire others, but to stick with them until they become self-sufficient, until they can then turn around and kindle others as well. And so I think that a message that is a very powerful and important message. It's something we have to be, in a sense, asking ourselves on the regular. How have I shared my flame? And have I sat with it? Have I made sure that it took, right? That it has taken? Did I just drop in, drop some inspiration and then helicoptered out? Or have I made sure that it has sparked, kindled, and is now burning? And so this, it's not an accident that we had two parshas in a row, both immediately following Shavuot, which both have the same trajectory defined in them. What does naso mean? Naso, last week's Torah portion, means to raise up. Naso et rosh b'nei Yisrael, raise up the heads of the people. What does Beha'alotecha mean? Raise up. And it means not to raise yourself. In neither instance does it mean to raise yourself, to make sure you are elevated, because the whole Shavuot, the whole Sfirat HaOmer, you've been working on raising yourself and refining yourself. And you've arrived to in a sense, the epitome of that success. Well done. You're coming to Shavuot and you are refined and you are presenting pretty darn well before God. And what are the next two Torah portions immediately after the gate, out of the gate after Shavuot telling you? Wonderful. You took care of yourself. You're in a great place, all things considered, as we should be. We should be striving for that ideal. And then the Torah says, and your job is not yet done. Mission not yet accomplished. Because after you've taken care of yourself, now, naso, beha'alotecha, go raise up others. Go help others elevate. Go bring whatever inspiration and share it with the rest of my children. I love you and you're my beloved, but I got a whole bunch of other children out there. And they all needed their inspiration. And if you love me, as we said, there's a very fascinating discussion. I think we quoted this in one of the weekly lessons we did a couple of weeks ago. But the Alter Rebbe, again, the founder of Chabad Hasidic movement, and so his disciples were engaged always in very lively and dynamic and fascinating debates and conversations, because this wasn't entirely, the whole of Hasidism was new. The whole of Hasidism was new. The Baal Shem Tov of this was in the span of a lifetime, one lifetime. This was not yet embedded and centuries old. It wasn't even really decades old. So this was new vistas were being opened up to these people who were devoted to serving God, a whole new approaches, or if it wasn't even a new approach, it was Renaissance. It was very exciting times. And debates as to the exact direction. Nothing had been really concretized. You had in the disciples of the Maggid of Mezrich an entire kaleidoscope of directions where you can take this general message of enhancing your relationship with God and go into particular directions. You can go with Aaron in the direction of Rav Aaron of Karlin, or Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, or Rav Nachman of Breslov, or the Shmuel Zayda, or Mendel Kotsk. You had all these different approaches, and then you had among them the Alter Rebbe, who grew a strong following in his approach, which is that you have to know and understand God to have a relationship. You can't just work on the emotion without working on the intellect. So you can imagine that those original Hasidim, the disciples of the Alter Rebbe, there was a lot of very heady and fascinating debates as to priorities and processes, etc. And what better place to have such a debate than at a Farbrengen, right? Why do it dry when you can do it lubricated, right? I mean, let's put down a bottle of mashka and a little herring and let's go at it, right? And so one of the Fabranians, one of the great Hasidim, one of the elder statesmen, as it were, gets up and says, L'chaim, L'chaim, God should bless me that I should succeed in my pursuit to love God, in my pursuit of Ahavat Hashem. And he should, this is right. And the son of the Alter Rebbe, who would eventually become his successor, Dovber, younger among the Hasidim, but obviously very revered, got up and he pointedly looked at the Chassid who had made that original L'chaim, and he says, L'chaim, Hashem should bless me in my and grant me success in my pursuit to love my fellow Jew, in my Ahavat Yisrael. And boom, this becomes a debate. Ahavat Yisrael or Ahavat Hashem, which is primary? Loving God or loving Jewish people? And arguments are brought. That everybody becomes consumed in this debate and discussion. Again, the textbooks have not yet really been written of Hasidic philosophy. There isn't yet a hard proofs or concretized sources. So each one of the Hasidim debating, they are quoting sources, but not Hasidic sources. They're quoting sources from scripture and from the Talmud and back and forth. And it's as they say in Yiddish, it's lebedik. It's a lively debate. Finally, they realize that they are not going to. Neither side is going to be able to give the definitive proof or statement or win the day, and so there's no choice but to take this straight to the Alter Rebbe himself to adjudicate the matter. And it came to the Alter Rebbe, and they said, Ahavat Yisrael or Ahavat Hashem. On the one hand, you have what Rabbi Akiva says, but on the other hand, isn't our whole effort to, everything is God, and so love for God is paramount, is above all things. In fact, the reason I'm loving my fellow Jew is because they are children of God. So it's really. So here's the Alter Rebbe's answer. That, in a sense, is very typical of kind of Jewish scholarly wisdom. He says, the answer is Avas Yisrael. Love your fellow. Why? Because in that you are showing your Avas Hashem.
Because that's what God wants you to do.
Because not only is what God wants you to do, it's not just fulfilling His will. But the ultimate testament of love is to love the one that your beloved loves.
Right.
God loves His people. And if you truly love God, you love His people.
Right.
Lehov et ahuv ohev. To love the one that your beloved loves. That is the ultimate testament of your love. That's when you know it is a selfless love that you have for your beloved. It's not about your love. I love you so much. It's about who you love. I love who you love. I love what you love because it's not about me. My love begins and ends with you. And if you love something, then I love it. And so if you're thinking the epitome of my mission is to become as close as possible to God, then yes, you deserve a lot of credit. And a lot of plaudits. But what's even more powerful is how many of those that God loves can you bring close to God?
That's what puts the engine in Chabad. That's why you wake up in the morning.
That's what puts the engine in Rabbi Akiva. I'm not going to. But if you think about it, this is what the Alter Rebbe was telling. Sure, you can bring yourself close to God, and that's a wonderful thing. And you brought one of God's beloveds back to Him. But how many more of His beloveds can you bring back to Him? And even if you're not going to bring them all the way back, but one step in the right direction.
Hmm.
We shared the story on Yom Kippur. I heard the story right before Yom Kippur, and I couldn't go 24 hours without sharing the story because it was to me such a heartbreakingly powerful and beautiful story. And forgive me, I forget the name because the name unfortunately was not familiar to me even before the story and even after the story. And that the reason for it is because wonderfully in God's holy people, there are a lot of these types of individuals. And what I'm talking about, there is a certain fellow in Eretz Yisrael, a scholar, a Torah scholar, a great Torah teacher, who then made it his business that outside of his hours teaching in the yeshiva, he started to take the Jewish children of the streets of, I think this was Migdal Emek, one of the cities in Israel, under his wing. He did not stay in his ivory tower, as it were. Among all the students that were ready, willing, and able to learn from him and to be inspired by him and feel very proud of himself that he was nurturing these special flames and turning them into bright, glowing candles. But rather, he roamed the streets of Migdal Emek, and when he saw a Jewish soul, a child, not from a religious house or whatever it is, but one that did not have their connection to Judaism, was not even necessarily provided that opportunity, he would invite them for a Friday night. He would invite them to come to do a little learning. He would invite them even to come play, organize a game of basketball and then sit with them learning afterwards. He became well known and beloved for this. The story goes that his wife and his wife had a child in their later years, and they were very doting on this child. They're what we call a ben zekunim, right? And a child that, children born in earlier years of life are beloved, but there's that special place for children that are born in later years. So they're ben zekunim. And then the child became ill and in quick order passed away. And the whole town, the whole city was devastated for him and for his wife. And he was visited by the luminaries of the Jewish world. They all came by to sit and be Menachem Avel, to bring consolation. And they really had each one of them in their own way, and coming together really helped support and bring comfort to this rabbi and to his wife, etc. On the last day of Shiva, the door opens, and in comes a young fella, incongruent to everybody else who is there, because he's not there wearing the hat and the white shirt and the jacket. He's coming in, he's wearing a t-shirt and a pair of jeans and sneakers, with a kippah perched on his head, clearly not one who wears it on the regular. But as soon as he comes in, this rabbi springs out of his chair, he goes running over and he gives this boy a hug. He says, "Come, sit." And he kind of motions for all the great rabbis to move aside and gives this kid this seat, the seat of honor directly across from him. And he's talking animatedly. This is one of his special projects. Is one of the young fellows that spend their times on the streets of the city. And at one point or another, this young young teenager turns to this rabbi, and he says, all of our whole crew or whatever it is heard the news and were devastated on your behalf. We really, we decided we're going to come together and give you a present. We're going to keep one Shabbos. we've decided in the merit of your son and his soul, we're all going to keep one Shabbos. All 35 of us. And the light that shone from this rabbi's face was something that everybody noticed, everybody took note of. And the tears that came down his face and the hug that he gave this person, it was, you can tell that this meant more to him than anything else. Afterwards, other members of his family came over and said to this rabbi, we noticed that you have been visited by some of the greatest Torah scholars and the names and the tzaddikim of this generation that came, and we saw how much it meant, all of it affected you. But there was nothing that affected you as much as these youngsters coming and saying they're committing to one Shabbos, but only one Shabbos. And yet this had the most profound effect. Why is that? And he turned to them. He turned to his family member and he said, it is actually only now in the depths of my grief that I truly understand how profound of a gift these 35 youngsters have given me. It's only because of the grief that I'm in. Because if anybody would come to me and tell me how meaningful and how special would it be if for just one more day my door would open and my son would come in and spend it with me. If I would just got one more day with my son. How much that would mean to me. These 35 boys just gave God one day with 35 of his children. Is there anything more meaningful? And that's what the Parsha is telling us. Every single one of these souls is God's candle. And we all have to feel that responsibility. If I can find a way to get that candle burning brightly, then my job's not done until it is. And Beha'alotecha Tanya wrote. All right, everybody?
Yeah.
Wow.
I remember it from High Holidays, but it was a great story.
It's a very powerful message, very, very powerful message.
It is.
Yeah, and we just each are offered, sometimes a fellow came to me actually right at the end of Minyan today and says, Rabbi, I'm not sure why it is, but apparently God, says that you said that the story of the Baal Shem Tov missed once a Shabbos and he wasn't able to observe a Shabbos properly, and it turns out he looked and it was introspective and he found a moment that was that to a certain degree that this was a result of his of misbehavior, as it were. And he says, I don't know why it is, Rabbi. So he's telling me nonchalantly, he wanted me to commiserate with him the fact that he loves coming to Shul on Shabbos and being here, etc., but he's got to travel to one of these perfunctory simchas out there, about mitzvah, but there, it's not going to be a proper in a shul or anything like that. It's going to be just this family event. So I have to go there because their family, they don't want me there. I don't want to be there, yada, 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 the typical spiel. And I'm like nodding and I'm looking at my watch because it's the end of davening and I got to get my kids to the bus stop and whatever it is. And I'm commiserating. And then I'm like, wait a minute. This is a moment. God has just moved certain chess pieces. And he's coming to me and he's telling me about this scenario. So I turned to him and I said, wait a minute. You're telling me that you're being set up for a situation in which you'll have to kind of accept the fact that you are a victim of fate and therefore have to observe Shabbos a little less? Or maybe you're being sent by God to a place where you can have an impact on all those that would otherwise be observing Shabbos less, but you are going to come loaded for bear, as it were, with a fully loaded ammunition pack of inspiration. You're going to find your opportunity to give them a little bit more Shabbos than they expected to otherwise have. Maybe you share a Dvar Torah, and maybe you make a Kiddush, and maybe you whatever it is. But you never, and I shared with him the famous moment that turned Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, into a devout chassid of the Rebbe. He was a young, brilliant, obviously always was brilliant college student, and he was on his way to being a magistrate, and that's what it was. But he had a summer off, and he wanted to visit all the great Jewish leaders in the world, and he stops by in Brooklyn to see the Rebbe. He had a young college student, lawyer, a law student. And within 3 minutes, the Rebbe is peppering him and asking him about his pursuit of a career in rabbinics. The Rebbe kind of immediately sensed that this is a neshama, this neshama has a special mission. And I was pushing him, and he's a respectful person in general, and on top of that, he's English, so of course he has to be excruciatingly respectful and cordial, etc. So how does he find a nice way to tell the Rebbe that it's not barking up the wrong tree? This is not the direction I'm going with my life, etc. So he starts off with, he says, he recognizes this, that it is almost criminally English. Start to response, and he says, Rebbe, in the situation that I find myself in. And the Rebbe stops him right there. The Rebbe says, a Yid never finds himself in a situation. Wherever you are is where you're meant to be. And you need to ask yourself, what is it that I can do to forward my particular mission in this time and in this place? And he says he then and there became a chassid of the Rebbe. And when the Rebbe told him that you're going to be a rabbi, that's what he was going to become. And and the rest is history, as they say. But a person never finds himself in a situation. And so I realized that this was, in a sense, a multi-layered thing. This person didn't come to me just for commiserations and for me to give the perfunctory nod and tisk that he wanted to hear. Yeah, I hear you. It's tough. You go. Hashem was moving a chess piece into place. And he was about to do this, and he needed to hear what he needed to hear so that he would go out and be on the offense, as it were, in that situation. And who knows who's going to be there this Shabbos that is going to hear something that he is going to share or say or talk about, or whatever it is, that's going to be what they needed to hear. And these are all throwaway moments, as it were. We've all had a million of them. But hopefully, in a sense, the message of the parsha is that when you're walking around with your flame and you're passing by a wick, take the time, light it, sit with it a bit, make sure it's lit, carry on. All right, everybody?
Rabbi,
Thank you.
the story's been going around a little bit lately about, I'm sure you can tell it 10 times better, 100 times better, about the young Chabad kid who keeps going to visit some executive somewhere, and he keeps asking him if you can put tefillin on him, and the guy keeps saying no, and then he goes back and he says no, and finally he keeps going back and back, and the guy says, why are you coming here all the time asking me? You see, I'm not going to put on the tefillin. And the kid says, I'm not coming here to force you to put on tefillin. I'm visiting you like a brother. And so the guy, I'm sorry, I screwed up the story. He said, we're brothers. We're brothers. I'm coming here to see you like you're my brother. And the guy was so touched that he became like, that's it. He became religious, like on the spot. And the guy, he was just so, actually, when Rabbi Marcus told the story, I started to cry also. It's such a beautiful story.
Yeah, and again, I think importantly, we have to understand that this is not the role of Chabadniks. This parsha is not for Chabadniks. All of us, in whatever capacity. Some again, we each have a role to play. And not necessarily is that role about walking into an office and wrapping tefillin with an executive. Maybe the role is we each bump into people that moment could be a moment where we touch our candle to their wick, and we just have to feel that, in a sense, that we have to feel that we are in that role. Beha'alotecha is talking to each one of us, and if we feel that, I'm not going to say responsibility because it's not a burden, it's not a responsibility. It's just simply this is part of the script of our lives. This is a part of the role we play in this world, to not just be a private individual when it comes to our flame. Our flame, fire automatically catches fire, right? Here on the East Coast, we are living the effects of that nature of fire. That it doesn't sit still, it doesn't sit self-contained. It immediately spreads, and if it's not an accident that the Torah gives us that particular metaphor that says that our soul is a flame, which means it doesn't take much for our soul. It's actually just the very nature of our soul, to touch something and spark and kindle it. So let's do it. Let's do it. And each one in our own unique way.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so
much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody.
See you, Shabbat.
All right. See you.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.